we're going to tell you about the flex layouts. They allow us to have more flexibility. As Armi said, we want to work not only with the power that Bootstrap offers, the concept of dividing the screen in 12 columns and how the data have to get organized when I have different sizes of screens. This is complementary and gives greater flexibility because, as Armin said before, it allows for this kind of interface. We don't know exactly what's the width of each one of the elements. It may vary, and it also allows to calculate and move these elements based on the size of the screen. And not only moving the element, but also adjusting the tables and the content of each element based on the size. In this web execution, we see each one of the photo with its actions on the right hand side. In this small screen, the actions go down. That is why we say it's a flexi. It has certain functionality. It's a CCS in the case of web that allow us to model this kind of interface in a much more powerful way than Bootstrap with the division in 12 columns. For the case of web, we have a new way of visualizing the grids that allow us to define them as flexi grid and makes available these other properties which establish how the flex layout has to behave, whether there will be inverted columns, inverted lines, and what happens when I have a line with a certain quantity of elements and I don't have enough space to show them all. How the content is going to be justified from left to right, right to left, whether it's going to be centered, there will be space or not between the elements. There are here several options that allow us to have this flexibility. These are more options inside Flex Layout. The alignment of the items, how we put them in lines, on how we align the lines when there is such space in the containers. In that case, we can visualize the content in various ways. And with regard to SD, the same concept applies. In this case, we want to show components with a variable width. So this is an example. We have this kind of components that have a certain width, and this one that takes all the width of the screen. So they are going to take their place with the flexi grid according to the space in the container. If we see it in the tablet, they would be in just one line, and then they continue down if they run out of space. In the drawing, you see the behavior, how it's loading the items. So to give you one more element, we have in the wiki this example of the application Bit News. It's just an application for news, and we have a grid with the news about crypto bitcoins, and then the bitcoins associated to the news. A priori, we don't know the quantity or the size, so we say that with justified content, these bitcoins will group from left to right in the upper part of the news. More about grids. We have the smart grids in this version, and they give much more power to the grids on which we have been working. This shows an example of the KB of the event with the speakers. In order to have these grids of speakers as a page on the right hand side, and we see a hint that shows the division to the right because there is a little bit of the item that is hidden. There are 3 items, 3 speakers by column, and that layout for the pages. we could do it in the past, but we had to code much more. Here is just with the image you see on the right hand side, applying the smart grid with the scroll in horizontal direction and the item 3 column, and the result is the one you see on the screen just by doing that. More about grids. The unique property for grids for web and smart devices was added, so also inverse loading property. It could be a chat application and the messages are loaded inversely. The refresh method for the web and devices, improvements with regard to multiple selection in the smart devices, and then a change in the runtime of the property. More about grids. The grids in web also has improvements. The property is unique, also the inverse loading. As you see also for the case of the chats, when they're different from 0, it is also possible to set the direction of the grids, and the modeling of the grids will also, the styles will also be much more simple. And you see here the other features with regard to the properties, etc. With regard to the CCS frameworks, you said that you could upload the file and from there you to the reference to the classes, etc. Will some of them already be included in GeneXus? Can we already put the HTML and GeneXus will have it among its classes or references? Well, in principle, no, because we don't see the need to supply things that overload the KBs starting from 0. We leave this at for the decision of the user. But Bootstrap, that is already included in the packaging of GeneXus. Yes, but Bootstrap has the special feature that we use it to solve the question of the columns. That is why we use Bootstrap initially with all its set of things. Not only the scripts that solve how the application is going to behave on the basis of the size, but also some styles that were applied to controls that we distributed. Now we have decoupled this. We leave the power of Bootstrap to calculate the sizes of the various controls in the interfaces, and we allow to integrate some other CCS frameworks that can coexist with that logic, but not with the Bootstrap style. So we are responsible of keeping the version of GeneXus 1, yes, depending on the controls you want to use and who's the provider. In this case, it's Semantics UI. You are going to import the CCS framework and use the controls.
Hola. Hoy decían de que cuando vas a...
You said earlier that when you're going to import an object, you could do a reference to a CCS framework or even a CCS made by the designer based on that CCS framework.
What happens if the designer uses other classes
that are not the CCS framework when he does the import? Does it replace the classes that I have inside GeneXus KB, or how does it operate? In our case, we work with designers that put up a CCS, and then the consolidation is a manual process. But it depends on many things regarding the CCS itself. If you use the same names of classes that you have already defined, it's probably going to be a conflict, and you'll have to define the properties in the priorities in the properties of the class so that one overcomes the other one. But the classes can be complemented. You can use some from the CCS framework and addition your own with a chain of classes that CCS allows for. And I think that it's being very well solved, because with that power you will be able to have modeling which is much more simple than the one we have now. But there's no process of importing an external file or consolidation. No, the CCS that generates your team is independent from the CCS framework. What it does, the GeneXus zip, it's going to define the static archive, which is going to be called, for example, Semantics UI .ccs and would be independent from the one that is generated by your team object.